So, Sydney Derby. Cody, were you there at the Sydney Derby last night?
I was indeed.
You were indeed
Very
there.
last minute actually. I wasn't intending on going. I was intending on spending a day with family, but I had a few other family members say they were going too, so I figured, you know what, why not enjoy it? And I'm glad I made the decision to go because it proved to be quite a game. It was fantastic.
So that was the game of the season. We've had quite a few contenders, like the original rivalry here in Adelaide. I thought was one. We had Victory Western United, for example, and Western United won 4-3. That was a game me and Jack did on FPF TV as well. There's been some candidates, but I mean, occasion, there was a comeback, the atmosphere, the quality of the goals, the shithousery. I mean, a young player in Zac Sapsford having his best game of his career, probably. There was a lot of different items that game ticked off that made it for me the game of the season. Jack, how did you see it?
Well, unfortunately, I didn't get to make the trip in person as the previous as I did go to the Newcastle Jets game earlier that afternoon. However, what a treat to come back to after going to McDonald Jones Stadium and taking in that match. Just quickly, I know we'll get to it, but speedy recovery to the fan that did uh,
Yeah,
collapse during the match and
yeah.
had to be taken away to a hospital. So speedy recovery and all the best to that family. But to come home and be treated with that sort of match in the Sydney Derby was, you know, sort of made the day a bit better after, a little bit morbid in that situation. So yeah, 3-3, very exciting. I mean, and Anthony Caceres is just having an absolute like tear of a season. Like I haven't seen him have a bad game this year. So I'm sure we'll get into that. But yeah, that's how I saw it.
Well, yeah, let's start with Caceres because he supplies the first goal with an incredible pass to set up Patrick Klimala. I actually think what's kind of gone underrated with this goal, though, is Patrick Klimala's movement to actually lose Anthony Pantazopoulos, get off his shoulder, run into the space, but then obviously Caceres has got to actually see his run and reward it. So for both players was excellent. Superb finish. Then we see Patrick Klimala with his European experience and probably his experience playing in, I believe he's played in the Old Firm derby, Celtic and Rangers. Now, I'm not too sure if when he was a Celtic player, he would have jumped over the fence in front of Rangers fans if he had scored, let's say, at the Ibrox, like he did here, jumping in front of Wanderers fans. That was certainly a brave decision. But he
Well, he's
was
he's played in Poland and he's probably
played in
experienced some
Poland.
derbies there. So I don't think he's very scared of that sort of occasion.
I
He seems
don't.
to love it.
No, and it did not seem like he was scared at all. Even though he had to be very, very quickly escorted back over the fence by the Wanderers security guard that was down that end. But 1-0, then literally a minute later, Wanderers come down. Clisby puts a good ball in. Harrison Devenish Mears, I think Cody probably wants to discuss his lack of ability in the Sydney FC goal. There was some aggressive text messages coming in on the group chat yesterday, but parries it straight to Southside 1-1. Then the Wanderers produce, like, honestly, one of the best counter attacks I've seen all season between Milanovic and Sapsford. About four passes between them over like 60 meters. Sapsford with a perfect low cross, Milanovic coming in for 2-1. And what really annoyed me about that goal and the third goal, which was Borello with a nice run setting up Sapsford, they both had to be checked for offside when they were both on, and it kind of ruined the atmosphere, the kind of crowd reaction to the goals. But the Wanderers are 3-1 up. They're looking good. Sydney, obviously, from like Douglas Costa comes on, Sydney start to exert some influence. Adrian Segacic then helps a bit more too. And I thought, like, it was only natural that the Wanderers were going to drop a little bit deeper. I mean, you're in a away derby, you're 3-1 up. It is difficult to just kind of keep playing against, a Sydney team with that quality and not allow them, at least a 10-minute period. And really, they did a great job for 87 minutes between particularly Pantazopoulos and Bonatig of clearing crosses, last ditch defending, and then as soon as Segacic scored, like, it just all went out the window. And I mean, Sydney, in the end, they get the Segacic goal. Then Lawrence Thomas actually produces an unbelievable save on the corner, but Anthony Caceres is just quickest to react, and we've got Sydney FC. That's like the second moment that they've had at home in a derby of late. We remember the Kacharski winner last year, then the Caceres equaliser this time around. Like they just had these big moments in front of the Cove, which is pretty cool for them. But the Wanderers, like I know it's easy in this situation to just point to Alan Stajic and be, oh, and he made these changes, and oh, he didn't do this, but like all the subs he made were like for like changes. He said afterwards, particularly with Borello and Gabriel Cleur, they were coming back from injury, and they were very much, subs made to manage those guys in their minutes. Yet, there's all this reaction afterwards, as expected, that, Stajic this, Stajic that. There's just this thing in the A-League at the moment where, like, whenever a team gives up a lead, like, it has to be the coach and the coach's subs. But, if the Wanderers held on and won 3-2, you wouldn't have heard boo about that. So I thought that was a little bit strange. I just thought the Wanderers had to be more resilient there. I mean, you're 3-1 up in the 87th minute. Like coaching or not, like you've got to be able to see out the game. Am I crazy with that? Am I not? Maybe Alan Stajic should take more
No, look,
ownership
I
there.
don't, where maybe there's an angle you can look at it where it's like, okay, maybe Sanchez could have done this, could have done that. I don't know what people are saying he should have done instead, and I'd like to hear the argument to
Well, that
what he could
yeah.
have done instead. And based on your reaction, I don't think there really has been an argument to
Well, if I
what he
just
could have done
before I let
instead.
you go, Cody, is like what if Stajic brought on another centre back or brought on like let's say he brought on Moe Alte for Borello. So it was like a defensive midfielder for a striker, and then the Wanderers led to that situation. Well then, yeah, okay, you can say he set the team up in a way to defend. That's going to happen. But he didn't do that. And that's kind of where I'm a little bit stumped by that. But as you were saying,
But the reality is, if that Wanderers say that match out and Stage does set his team up defensively, then people are praising him for game
exactly.
management.
Yeah.
It's you got to pick your poison at the end of the day. It's a tough one. It's not a position that I'd envy, of course. But I look at his bench. I don't think there's much different that he could have done. He had Alex Gersbach on the bench, but he said, I don't know if him or it was him or Noel Arate said it, but he goes back still underdone. Hasn't played a lot of football in a while. I think was in his off season, so he's still working his fitness up. Imagine if people had a scene goes back come on. It's like, oh yeah, he's done really really well. He's brought on a defender, and then goes back. Maybe I won't say he makes a calamitous error because he's a good footballer still, but let's just say he doesn't track a run properly because he's not match fit or match aware. The match sharpness isn't there. I'm going in football manager terminology now. I do apologize, but imagine that happens. Then people go, oh, see Alex, why did he bring on Alex? Goes back, it's clearly not ready. I think it came out in the Suited and Booted pod. I remember them mentioning Alois. He actually spoke about like you see these players that day in day out. You know everything about them and their fitness levels and what they can and can't do. There's clearly a method to why Stasic made the choices that he did. I'm not even gonna say the onus is on the players for maybe they should have been a bit more resilient. I think the credit needs to go to Sydney FC purely the way that they were able to flip the script on his head, the fight they showed to actually get themselves back into that match. I think it's more Sydney FC just doing really, really well in those moments than Wanderers doing anything out of the ordinary or disastrous. Could they have been better? Sure, but I think how well Sydney did probably overarches how poor Wanderers were because I don't think Wanderers were that poor, but Sydney were that good, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, look, I want to disagree with the Wanderers being resilient point, just for the sheer fact that it's not just sort of a blemish on their record. Like they've lost the last two Sydney derbies. They've drawn when they ought to won, and there's also been occasions where the Wanderers could really get a sort of foothold in the top six, and they just haven't taken their opportunity on the day, and they've fallen short, and they find themselves in eighth when, if my maths is correct, they would have been as high as fifth come the end of this round if they had carried on and won that game. So, look, I don't want to come down too hard on them because I think that whilst the Sydney Derby is still the biggest spectacle in Australian football, and also there are stars on both sides, um, I think that both squads don't have a lot of depth in defence. That was definitely on show last night. I think during the game, we and a few weeks ago we mentioned about Sydney FC, being very very light in defence with the centre backs they were losing when we are looking at sort of some transfers in the previous pod that I was on, and West Sydney Wanderers sort of ditto. But yeah, I think that the Western Sydney Wanderers, I don't think it's a stagic thing. I just sort of think that they don't have a lot of cattle, but it's also a mental thing for them because it's not the first time this season that they've been had an opportunity to get, even as high as a top four spot in the A League, and on the day they just haven't shown up. I mean, they showed up for about 60 minutes, and then for the last half an hour, Sydney FC were putting the sword to them, and I was just watching it at home, and I was watching it with family, and we just said Sydney FC will get a result out of this. Like as soon as they hit the 65th minute, like you could just tell, like the Wanderers weren't there and they weren't going to win.
It's funny you mentioned the lack of depth in defense. I think you see probably the best and worst of having a bit youngish squads as well. There's players that are coming on. You've got some young heads coming in. For Sydney FC, they're in a position where, okay, we've got nothing to lose. Let's just show a bit of fight and see what we can do. Players like Kucharski, Sekic coming on, clearly flipped the game on his head, even Douglas Costa, but I'm sure we'll talk about him individually in a minute. But one thing that I probably want to point out as well, and I'm sure it's something you've got on your list, Christian, the atmosphere that Sydney FC created that day as well. To be a young team in that is like when it's for you, that would have kicked him into another gear, even not just the young players. That whole squad, I'm telling you, I was there, I was closer to where the Sydney FC side was. The noise is deafening. That's something, and we can talk about it. Oh, it's great for the league, it's great for this, it's great for that. It's also just good to get your team back into a match as well. It's great, great stuff, and I think that probably plays an element into it as well. But on the flip side, Wanderers, they've got a youngish team as well. There's a few young kids coming into the match as well later on. That's a tough environment to play in. So, you know, you know me, Christian. I'm very happy to criticize a side if they've done something stupid, if they've done something wrong. But I don't think this is something that I'm going to look at and put a lot of pressure on Wanderers for like, oh, how dare you not hold a 3-1 lead? Yeah, there's things they can do better. But I think there's a lot that went Sydney FC's way in that game. And I'm not talking about the fact that they had 8 minutes of injury time. I think to an extent that was actually justified. But there was a lot that Sydney FC did right, and I think that's probably where a lot of the conversation needs to go to.
Yeah, and I mean, so I think for both of these teams, for the Wanderers, it's been an issue all season where they just have these periods in games for 20 or 30 minutes where they drop deep, they stop playing the way they should be playing, and particularly defensively, they just leave gaps. And then they've had these games, like I can remember one, for example, when they played Adelaide United at home really early on the season, where they basically were so poor in the first half, and particularly the first half an hour, that it pretty much lost them the game. So this is not, so to Jack's point, Jack's right. This actually isn't an isolated incident from that point of view. But I do have to agree with Cody and say that it's also not isolated for Sydney FC to come back in this situation like this. They did it very similarly here in Adelaide to draw the game 3-3. They did it in Newcastle recently. I'm trying to just quickly go through their results and remember. They did it in Brisbane early on the season. I remember that game from 2-1 down. So they've had plenty of games now where they've come back. And also, I'll mention this too because there's been at various points this season from the Sydney FC fan base, Tale out. Tale's been underwhelming. The results aren't there. Defensively, we're terrible. And look, particularly defensively, yeah, like there's still some serious issues there. What I would say though is for them to dig in like that in a derby at home and play like that, and yeah, Douglas Costa obviously helps, but I do think those players are very much like seeing things. They're on Ufuk Tale's side. They want to play for him, and they're doing their best in every single one of these games. I don't think it's an effort thing with Sydney. I think Sydney, I think tactically they've got some issues, and defensively, I mean they're running really thin at the moment. I mean, young Carl Shaw, who probably he was very good against Adelaide, but probably then second up last night. I think he kind of got a bit more of a reality check going up against someone like Brandon Borello, for example. He struggled a bit, and Ryan Grant had some decent moments, but I mean, Ryan Grant is not a centre back; he's a fullback, right? And I think in a game like that, he kind of got exposed a little bit too. So I think both these teams. I think Stajic even said it afterwards. He was kind of like, "Look, if you look at the story for both teams, like they're very good going forward, but defensively, they've just been too porous." And yeah, it's kind of been the story for Sydney FC not defending well, giving away leads, giving other teams a head start in games, and then having to actually pull off miraculous sort of fight backs. And then the Wanderers, it's actually either starting a game poorly and similarly, losing the game from there, or starting a game really well and then falling asleep for a 20-minute period in the second half and then letting a team back into it. So, I mean, the frustrating thing for the Wanderers is, particularly more for Alan Stajic, is like this could have been a massive statement win, right? Because you could say, yeah, they lost the other two derbies, but I felt, by the way, like we've had all three derbies like in the first sort of 60% of the season halfway, which has kind of felt a little bit weird. I would have thought like they would have put one kind of closer towards the end, but anyway. And this just felt like he needed a big result because there's definitely a few Wanderers fans still out there that definitely aren't kind of big fans yet of Alan Stajic, and I just thought for him that was kind of a bit demoralizing. And for Tale, I mean, Sydney FC, it's kind of one step forward and like a step back again because they had a great result against Adelaide. They were superb. And then they come out in this game and they score first. And then suddenly at halftime, they're going in 2-1 down, 1 minute into the second half, they're 3-1 down. Like a team of this experience in particular and this much quality, I feel shouldn't be in this position this often, Jack.
Yeah, well, I think that you've sort of highlighted the two converging storylines. Sydney FC have gotten themselves into predicaments and had to work hard to get them out of holes that they've realistically dug themselves, whilst Western Sydney Wanderers have had some pretty positive leads and positive periods, and they've just sort of let the game go and get away from them in periods. But I just wanted to be a little bit more positive. I mean, Segacic and Kaczarski off the bench were great, two young Australian players. I mean, Segacic in particular, since he's come back from the second division in Holland from his loan spell, I had think's been tremendous. And what a weapon to have. And like Kaczarski and Segacic, I mean, I have to say, like, you could even look at the bottom six teams in the A League, and they'd be week in, week out starters playing 90 minutes a match if they could. And also, obviously, Sapsford, like Derby specialist, but it's not just the derby. I think Sapsford's rose to the occasion. I think he's that sort of occasion player. And that's something that the Western Sydney Wanderers are going to have to value in some sort of contract because that's going to be extremely valuable in a transfer perspective if they do, like in terms of extending him beyond. I know they've probably already put an extension in. I think they did at some point this year, but I can't quite remember. But he's got a bit of Didier Drogba about him. Like, you know, he's not like I was going to say like.
Well, this is a comparison. Keep going.
Hold on. So like, he's not the most prolific goal scorer, and that's not to say that he can't be the most prolific goal scorer in a league. But when it comes to the big matches where someone's got to step up and perform, it's not just in Sydney derbies. It's been in several other games this season as well. He's really led from the front, and it's just really, really impressive from a young player to be able to do that. So I genuinely think Sapsford is a player that, could be there when Western Sydney Wanderers, if they ever get to the promised land of an A-League championship one day. I think that if you build the team around him, he's going to show up on those big occasions. So they really need to make sure they can lock him down for as long as possible because, there's going to be some people with some pretty fat checkbooks coming and looking at him soon.
Well, I'm having a look here and just going off Transfer Market, which says that Sapsford's contract expires in June. And then I've also, I'm going back here to June of 2022 is when he signed a 3-year deal with the Wanderers. So, yeah, I think his contract might be up at the end of the season. And
the fucking board better get on that one quick.
Well, right, like
there'll be riots in Parramatta.
I don't know what's going on there because like they could very easily lose him for free in the off season, and like the way he's going, they probably will. That was, like I mentioned before, that was his best game I've seen of his career. And you're right, Jack. I think to just label Zac Sapsford as like a derby specialist or just a big game player is pretty disrespectful to actually how well he's played this season. I mean, the movement that he offers, he's actually like this Wanderers attack. This is one thing I think Alan Stajic has got very much right since he's taken over. The attacking sort of structure of the Wanderers is very dangerous, and with Milanovic and Borello and Sapsford and Kryev, like you've got four guys that can interchange positions. They can offer a vertical threat in behind, and Sapsford now he's actually adding the finishing element to it too. The only thing is he could have had a hat trick. There was like he had a couple chances at 3-1 to just actually bury the game, and I mean you look at it now and think, wow, like if he took one of those, we're looking at a pretty comfortable Wanderers victory probably. Cody, any word actually on on Sapsford, but also we haven't actually given Douglas Costa some flowers here because I really did think, I know Segacic and Kacharsky you mentioned, but you need to have that experienced guy to almost lead the way for those guys to then come on and actually have their imprint too. And I thought Douglas Costa, like, he just got himself involved straight away. He got in good areas. He used that brilliant left foot of his to actually whip some dangerous crosses into the box as well. And he hasn't had the goals and assists on the board to really justify it. And also, he's obviously just come back from a 6-week layoff, but he's been like pretty good. I've been pretty impressed whenever he's actually played this season.
I'll start with Sapsford quickly. I think if you're looking at his season overall, 6 goals and an assist in 15 games, and he's not playing 90 minutes week in, week out. You're talking pretty much goal involvement every 2 matches. That's a pretty good record. I think that's something that should be highlighted. And it's funny because I remember during his kind of youth days, he was probably more of a creator per se rather than an out-and-out goal scorer. So it's interesting to see how he's kind of developed into what he can be for the Wanderers. It's interesting. I do hope Wanderers do keep him on, or at the very least, give him another season contract and try and sell him off because he's someone that could get in a decent fee as well. If clubs overseas see someone that can step up in a big game as well, and more often than not have their better performances in aside's biggest games of the season. That's what you want. That's what you want. That shows a mentality that may actually last overseas too. He's 22 now. He'll probably be going over at a good age. If he can get into a club overseas somewhere where he can be a starting player for him, I reckon he'd actually do quite a decent job if he went to a low Scottish Premier League club or maybe a League One club. That might be his level overseas. But if he can go somewhere where he's going to get minutes, that's a move that I'd probably take if I can get that at the moment. Douglas Costa. Funnily enough, watching him last night, there was moments where I was getting really, really frustrated because, and I don't know if it's something that's been coached into him a little bit, where maybe he's not.
You didn't get your Brazilians mixed up, and it wasn't actually Leo Senna that you were getting frustrated with because.
Oh no, he frustrated me a lot as well. Great technical player, but for a Derby player, someone filling a role that Bratton used to have, the guy has no upper body strength or no bone of aggression in his body whatsoever.
I'd actually disagree. I think he has a lot of upper body strength because he wins a lot of fouls. He's actually the most foul player in the league, but that could also be because he gives up when he feels like. Yeah, he gives up when he feels one touch. Wellersol does this as well for Newcastle when he plays. Jack would have seen it earlier on the season, where it's just like, no, but like it's a perfect comparison because I'm sorry, like these Brazilian guys who come in and they're just like, oh shit, this league's physical. Wait, what? And then they just stop playing as soon as they like feel a tug of the shirt.
The adverse reaction is you get someone like Marcelo who brings that aggression and maybe a bit too far.
I did think one point, Cody, before I let you go on a bit more about Douglas Costa, was the third goal they checked for offside against Sapsford, but they actually showed on the TV earlier on, Brillante actually looked to have a bit of Senna's shirt leading up to it, and it did feel a little bit, that's probably given if the referee kind of sees that in real time. So that was
but
probably
it's probably a bit of the boy who cried wolf as well. The amount of time Senna went down for no reason and was winning fouls.
This is the problem, right? If you keep crying wolf like that, the referee's going to be like, "Well, get fucked, man." Like,
that's my point.
Yeah. No, you're right. Yeah.
But no, the thing with Douglas Costa, you see the highlights of him when he's playing at Juventus and all that, and then like the guy does things with the ball that's almost unimaginable. He's absolutely a fantastic player. And take players on, he'll be behind you before you can even blink and say boo. But I feel like since he's come to Sydney FC and probably even coming out of his injury, maybe a thing as well, they're just trying to manage him and get him to play a style that doesn't see him like break a knee or something like that. I don't know. But every time he's got the ball, he'll almost slow down with it and stand his defender up, and he's forced into a position where he's got to play pass rather than being able to take someone on quickly like that. And that's when he first came on, that frustrated the hell out of me because there was many times where he's got a defender one-on-one and he slows down, stops himself and goes, oh, now I've got to find a pass. And mind you, the guy can pass the ball as well. It wasn't exactly to Sydney's detriment. But it's just a weird feeling when a player can take that extra gear. And I think as Sydney were getting further into that match and they were getting a little bit more desperate. Then his mentality started going, okay, yeah, now I've really got to click into gear and create something and maybe do something that surprises Wanderers defense a little bit and try and create a bit more space for myself. Obviously, the goal that came from Segacic was from a Douglas Costa pass too, but I don't know if that's something that's being coached into him and if it's an Australian thing where, we don't necessarily like players that try to be flashy and try to be fancy. I know there's been, you look at how your Azanis and Tilios go and people put them down very, very quickly for doing that sort of stuff. And we're looking at it going, okay, we want to coach our, we want to overcoach our players to a certain point of view, to a certain point. But you give you have someone like Douglas Costa, if you let him off the leash a little bit and go out there, do whatever the fuck you want, just try and win us this game. Sydney FC probably could have gotten back into that game a little bit earlier. But
I think he does do that. I've watched every Sydney FC game this season, and
it might be a thing of I was looking at it last night because I was looking at it a little bit more closely,
yeah.
and maybe it's something that they're doing just to manage, or something that he's doing because he's trying to manage his injuries.
Yeah,
Doesn't want to
maybe that's the case
make those
last
high speed
night.
runs and all that.
Might have been managing.
That could be it. But you can't argue that we do have an issue of overcoaching in certain areas in this country too.
Yeah, but I wouldn't put Ufi Tale in that mix. I think he does allow Sydney
Maybe.
FC. I mean, look at Joe Lolly this season, for example.
Yeah,
He
that's
actually
fair.
he's playing him in more of a free role too this year, and it's kind of getting him
That's
in
fair.
more scoring
Maybe
positions.
if he's just catching strays. Because of
I
the
think
opinion that
he
I
is.
have.
I think you got to lay off Ufi here. No. But I
And
mean,
look,
Costa last night.
I'll take that. I'll take that. But I speaking back to the positive side of things where Costa was able to come on and make an impact. You have someone that has that higher level of technical ability. You have someone that has that experience that's like, he's performed at the top level. He's played Serie A, played Bundesliga. He knows his way around football pitch and he sees the game in a different way to what the other players do. When you have that option on the bench and you've got someone that doesn't just have that ability but has a desire to actually come on and want to put on a show and want to show that he can be the guy. It's You mentioned before he probably hasn't had the goals and assists to warrant what he's been able to do this season. He's been probably the underrated part of Sydney's attack this season. Joe Lolly and Patrick Lamala, they're the ones that have gotten the goals and assists, and they're the ones doing the numbers, and they're the ones that are able to get in front of Sydney fans to celebrate. But Douglas Costa does a lot of work behind the scenes to allow them to flourish as well, which is brilliant as well. When you're paying, look, he's on good money too. You want someone that's gonna have that impact. But I think it's also funny the fact that Sydney's probably poor patch of form this season came when Douglas Costa was injured as well. So for someone that's not pulling as much numbers as what some other players in the front three do, you see the impact that he can have when he's not on the pitch. And it was chalk and cheese between when he was off the field and when he was on the field last night.
Yeah, 33 minutes last night, 53 touches. He had 80% pass accuracy, not bad. Obviously got the assist for Segacic, 4 key passes, created
Just
one
on
big
that,
chance.
53 touches for a winger coming on
In 33
late
minutes.
into a
Like, it's
match.
pretty...
That's
yeah.
that's nuts.
That's what I
and
mean,
that shows
yeah.
how much Sydney value him to get him on the ball and actually
Right. And he
have
also
that impact
had
as well.
he also had 12 crosses attempted in just 33 minutes. Only 3 of them were actually successful, to be fair. But 2 out of 4 dribbles completed. He lost possession 19 times in 33 minutes, but he also, like we mentioned, had 53 touches, so it's kind of going to happen. But yeah, like, I just felt he tried to make things happen. All right, we need to conclude the derby chat because that's almost been half an hour on one game. Okay, so